Welcome to the Link podcast, brought to you by the School of Health, Education, Policing and Sciences at Staffordshire University. The Link is created by staff, students and healthcare professionals, which includes related topics, discussions, interviews and lived experiences.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Link podcast, and today we are venturing into the world of AI. This has been quite a journey with AI in recent years, and as I've just been saying off mic, there seems to be as much excitement as there is fear with its use and how it's being used and the applications of its use, to the point where we're still really not sure how to use it, when to use it, and in what circumstances, and certainly in university, what constitutes as using it in a good way and what would constitute in using it in a way that might get you into trouble. In particular, though, what we're talking about today is our journeys with using AI and how I've been using it and how it's helped me also from a neurodiverse point of view as well. And we have a very special guest today, and we have Craig Smith. I'll let him formally introduce himself. He is doing some fantastic things with AI in different sectors, but mainly to assist in executive function. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, Craig. Thank you so much all the way from Australia. So we're very happy that you were able to get this in as soon as possible, and we found you through a TED Talk. So yeah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm Craig. I'm based in Australia, and I work for an organisation called Positive Partnerships. We're a federally funded project. We run autism education workshops for families and for schools across Australia. And I've been a school teacher for about 20 years, and I've mostly worked in autism education for that time. And prior to that, I was a pipe organist. But now I'm firmly in the world of autism education.
Wonderful. Wow, quite the accolade. And to be in teaching as well. So when you were in education, what kind of years were you looking after?
Yeah, I mostly taught primary school aged children who, for us here in Australia, that would be anywhere between, say, 5 years of age to 12, I'd say. That was the main cohort that I worked with, and I sort of cut my teeth in teaching on that age of student, and absolutely loved it from the start.
Wonderful. So I think we'll go back to the very beginning then. As I said, Kirsty and I have discovered you basically through your TED Talk, which was really, really interesting. And all these links, by the way, guys, as normal, we'll construct and put in the show notes, so you can go ahead and watch that. What got you to that point in time where you started to realise that this was something special here with AI?
Yeah, I think I've always been really interested in what technology can do to support accessibility. I'd say for the past 10 or 12 years, I've just always been interested in what's available to support leveling the playing field. You know, like I've been really interested in mobile technology like iPads for years. I was really interested when interactive whiteboards first came into classrooms.
Oh,
I was
God,
like,
I remember those.
Remember those?
Yes,
yeah.
I do.
And it was a real, it was this shift from blackboards to interactive whiteboards. And at the time I was like, wow, you can show movies to students now, and you can draw over images and annotate things. And even at that time, it was like, I was really interested in how is this not just another piece of cool tech and another maybe teaching tool, but what are the accessibility implications? And I think that's what still has been the conversation for me with artificial intelligence is, I mean, there's so much noise around AI, wherever you look, someone's doing something with AI, and there's a lot of positivity and then there's a lot of pushback. For me, I'm very interested in, again, what can it do to level things out and provide support and accessibility guidance to people who really need it, and particularly for me, for students who need it, and for adults who are neurodivergent who can utilise this as part of their work and their daily life.
Absolutely. And one of the things I really liked, you've got a really good working knowledge of the I guess, the issues, for want of a better term. Some would coin them as well, part of us that is actually makes us really, really good at things as well. We were designed, our brain wiring and how we are, like ADHD, autism. Our society did need many, many different wirings of brains, for it to function, like different cogs in a machine. And I was talking to this about a student, hence why I was going down this line, and because they were getting quite upset about their neurodivergence. That is not uncommon, as you'll know yourself, Craig, as well, but there is a lot of shame and guilt and, wanting to hide away and wishing that they weren't this way. And I always get quite upset about that, because there was a time in our history where this was massively beneficial, and what it is now is more that the way society's changed and the constructs and what is required of us as human beings has changed, and our brains haven't, because just like losing our tail, that takes a really, 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 really long time. And so one of the areas that we really struggle in, particularly in academia and in what I like to call adulting, is executive function. And you describe it really well. It's like this limited space, which can be different from person to person with different divergence. That means that planning committee, you had it like different, imagine different departments that were to do with organising and planning and prepping and prioritising. That's the areas where we really struggle, and particularly keeping things in our working memory. And there's a finite space where it will soon fill up and it drains quickly. And I thought that was really inventive. And one of the things Jessica McCabe from How to ADHD talks about is automate or delegate. And that's also Eric Tivers from ADHD Rewired talks about this as well as strategies. We can automate something, or we can delegate it to something else. Well, actually, the way that you described it, you were doing both. So that connection between understanding what the person really needs and where their pitfalls are and where their shortcomings are and how to use this, at what point did that come?
Yeah, you're right. And I think that focus on executive functioning for me always feels like a really very direct way to talk about the impact of neurodivergent minds, but for all the things that you've just said, that cognitive load, and I mean the way that I describe it in the TED talk, and also just how I typically think about it is, it's like that executive functioning is the administration team of the brain. It's if the brain is a business, it's the front desk, it's the admin staff at the front. They manage the communication between different departments, and they help everything flow. And I think it's it doesn't matter how brilliant any individual department is in the brain. Like, I think lots of us have different strengths. I love writing. I love to write, I love to read, and that part of my mind is probably doing really well. But if I just rely on that and that strength, then a lot of other things, they sort of don't get that level of attention and support. And so everything doesn't quite talk the way that it might need to. So I need to always think about, what am I doing to give resourcing to that administration team, that executive functioning. And for all of us, I mean, particularly for those with neurodivergent minds, that's the thing that gets really resource stretched. And I've heard someone sort of make a description of it where they say, for some people, their administration teams are like they've got 3 full-time employees all the time in their admin team, running messages back and forth, organising the calendar, communicating. For some of us, we've got like one half-time, part-time worker in there, and they're really struggling to communicate and organise and do all the tasks that we need our executive functioning to do. And you think, if there is that resource gap and there is that need to support some of the challenges that executive functioning can face, exactly as you said, can you automate or delegate? Like, I think that's a lovely way of framing it. And that, for me, is where artificial intelligence can be a support for cognitive load, for cognitive accessibility, and that's what I'm interested in. That's really where I've personally found real success, and also people I've worked with, it's been a way to find success there as well.
Wonderful. Yeah. Now I'm starting to come on to my favourite part, because Kirsty knows, I think, what's coming up. So Kirsty's with us today. For those first-time listeners, she helps produce. She's a previous student and is a master's student now, perpetual student like me. She was, when I first started telling her, or I think you were sat in with me, right? And I was doing something with ChatGPT, but I was talking to it, and she started to laugh at me because of the way I would engage with it. And because I asked if it was able to have a name, what would it like to be called? And it came up with a really rational, logical name, and it's called Sage. And so each morning I say, "Hey Sage, how's it going?" And it just talking to it like a person. And I think connecting that to how you used it, because we're talking about, okay, this is going to help with executive function. This is going to be our assistant, and to almost augment the brain that we have to help us with those tasks and be more productive. So one of the things that she connected and got in touch with me straight away when she saw the video, she's like, "Craig talks to AI like you do and have this conversation." And it felt very intuitive to me, and I didn't feel like I was, because people are like, well, it's just a machine. It's just it's a chat bot. It is, but it's not like I'm aware, thinking it's a person or self-aware. I'm very of the understanding that it isn't, but it's more about me experimenting with it and creating, for me, it was creating a flow state of consciousness to be able to connect with it and have it augment. And I thought the more authentic I could be and how I want it to be with me, we can get more done, basically, can understand me more, so therefore build a backlog and a kind of data set to be able to algorithmically recognize where I need the support. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing the same thing. Colleagues of mine and friends, for about a year, I've been doing it in this same way that you've just mentioned, Ben. That I can remember when it first was available, and I was going for a walk with my dog, which I do every morning. It's my daily routine. And I got this alert that this voice mode was available in ChatGPT. I had headphones on, and I thought, I'm just going to say hi and see what it does, and I had no idea. And then I started to talk to it, and it started to talk back. And I just had this moment of thinking, like you said, I know this is software. I know this is just code running through the phone and through the internet, but having this conversation is opening really interesting reflective possibilities for me. And I just started to say, can you help me organize my day? I've got a lot on. Can you help me to prioritize? Can you help me to think about how long these different tasks should take? And that's become my daily experience. Is I talk to it of a morning and I talk to it of a night. So I go for a walk in the morning, say for half an hour. I'll just say, good morning. Mine has a name as well.
Oh, yeah? Oh, really?
Which I think, I can't remember, I think because they expanded the range of of voices. And I think I just gave it the name of the voice that it came with. And anyway, I say, good morning. And I say, here's what I've got on for the day. And it's just a brain dump, it's just getting it out of my head. And I think, who else would I say this to? It's not stuff I necessarily want to put onto my partner first thing in the morning and say, hey, here's all the stuff I'm thinking about, because they've got their own stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, I could otherwise just quietly contemplate to myself as I'm walking around the streets. But, and this is something that I've been very interested for a long time in, this idea of continuity of mind, or sometimes referred to as continuity of thought, which is how long can you stay with an idea in your head before it just turns into something else and you lose focus. And that's every time I go for a walk and just think to myself quietly in my head, 30 seconds later, I'm like, I have no idea what I was just thinking about, because suddenly I'm thinking about a movie that I saw 5 years ago, and then I'll see a bus go past with an ad on it, and I'll start to think about, I've had that drink advertised on that bus. And then, I'm suddenly so far gone from where I originally thought I was that I get home and I have no idea what I've been thinking about. It's just been this series of glitching little thoughts and reminiscences, which it's lovely, but it's not practical. And for me, I wanted to be more practical with organizing my mind, and having that conversation with AI really let me follow ideas through to different conclusions, because I could say, here's what I've got on. And it would say, okay, let's organize what you've got on. And then I'd say, let's prioritize. And I actually want to really think about how to bring this up in a meeting later in the week. And it would say, okay, let's talk about it and role play and practice it. And that for me was a real moment where I thought this could apply in a really practical way to the way that people start their day, the way they organize themselves for work, or just talk through social thoughts and reflections as well. I mean, the other week I had to bring up something with a colleague at work, and I was a bit nervous about how to do it. I wasn't quite sure how to phrase it. And I was very transparent with AI. I said, I'm a bit uncertain. I've got to talk about this thing. Can you help me think of different ways to do it that will be kind, but also get to the point of what I need to say? And it gave me all these different variations and said, practice it on me. And I said, okay, I'd love to practice it. Like, that stuff that I'm like, what other way could you do that other than maybe have, a very trusted mentor at your disposal 24 hours a day when you want to have those conversations?
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's incredible. Oh, there's a lot to unpack there. But I'll just start by saying, by the way, for anyone who thinks Kirsty's mean, she's not at all. She was very right to actually feel a bit kind of weirded out by that. I think a lot of people with the right mind would be. I remember my mum used to say thank you when she activated Siri to ask it to play Wet, Wet, Wet. And that seemed strange to me at the time. Because it wasn't a chat bot. It wasn't having a conversation. It was literally like, what do you want me to do? And it was just the functionality was quite minimal. As Kirsty's done some groundwork on this and shared with me as well, AI is not necessarily quite a new thing. It's basically developed and expanded ever since we've been creating faster GPUs, processing units in the 2000s, really, in late 90s. And history goes way back to the 1900s as well, which will add some sections in the links for those that are interested in the history of AI. So, yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. I feel like it's talking to your doctor, right? Okay, so you talk to the GP, right? And you go, you're going in with back pain. He says, how's your back? Yeah, good. Yeah, not too bad. Is pain bearable? Sure. You walk out and say, why the hell did I do that? Why did I not be authentic and honest with the doctor? There's many reasons. There's power dynamics, there's social scripting, there's anxiety states, people not actually wanting to know the truth, 100% all that. The beauty of this is not another human. You were talking before about, I don't want to dump all this on my wife, so to speak, because she's got her own spoons that are doing their things, and what that's going to do is literally pass on my problems to somebody else. And this can be a massive barrier, not only for neurodiverse people who have, I don't know if you connect with this, Craig, as well, but rumination is a massive issue. We could have those social interactions which we struggle to read and understand and interact with. And when you're doing that with us, we might not be able to see a difference as to somebody who's normal. That's why it's a hidden disorder. We get home, that could be our night done, thinking about the conversation we've had and how that's going to impact on people, how I came across, the different things I could have said. We struggle to reach out to the people and say, why didn't you talk to me? And the answer commonly comes back is, I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want to put things on your plate. I know that you're busy. I know that you're struggling. And God bless us, the neurodiverse bunch. We, for every ounce of us that doesn't really connect emotionally to people, there's these times when we absolutely go over the top. And we go, we're caring for that person way more than we care for ourselves. So this is a really interesting area that I also want to look into. And I've actually given my kids this, as one of my kids who's doing coding. I've tasked him with something. I won't share on here just in case. But I love talking to ChatGPT. I don't know about you. I really enjoy it because I can just be authentic, and it's that flow state. And when we talk about executive functioning, I think that when we are asking Google something, we are using a section of working memory or power, basically, what RAM we've got, converting ourselves into this is how I interact with the web. When we go to a meeting or a social event, a lot, maybe even 60-70% of our working RAM is put into how to socially be, recognizing facial patterns, trying to fit in, trying to, not make an idiot of yourself, or to blend the conversation in, not speaking too much, but still, not being quiet, being funny, but not being taking over the room, and that is blown. Anything left for any cognizant conversation is minimal. Whereas here, we've got a space where we can be authentic. And I think that lack of masking might be one of the parameters to why this is the case, why this is so fluid and accessible for us to have this authentic conversation, because it's our flow state. And certainly I can't speak of, although I'm autistic, I feel like if I know my ratios of ADHD to autism, although they're thinking of scrapping the whole thing and just calling it autism, not a bad idea. But for ADHD particularly, we have a flow state where it has to come in and flow out like a river. And if we match that speed, like you're saying, walking as well is ideal, we can continue in that and be really, really knowledgeable. We remember things, we recall is great, but it's the jank. It's when that has to stop for a reason, or you have to give that other person time to talk, and then you're thinking about those social things. And as you said, that's gone. That moment's gone. And it's really hard work and you feel exhausted by the end of it. But here, it can just be a flow state where it's, I don't know, for me, it feels like 40% conversation and maybe 60% productivity. But I think certainly that's one of my theories as to why this works well for neurodiverse individuals.
I think so too, Ben. And as you were talking just then, I was thinking about something that I sometimes wonder is, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I really like talking to my dog. I love walking with my dog. I spend time with my dog. Talking to a pet or talking to an animal, which I don't mean it has to be a full-blown conversation, but it's having a little chat. For some of us, is very relaxing because there's not that social pressure of thinking, I'm trying to anticipate how the other person is receiving this conversation. I hope I'm not being too boring. I hope I'm not being too over the top. And you're always like socially navigating this two-way, sort of social dialogue. When you talk to a pet, it's just very relaxing because you think they don't care. They're just lying there, Well, to me, that's a similar dynamic to talking to AI, because I think AI is not going to yawn or look at its watch and think, oh, Craig's really going on about his day. I better sort of, I'm trying to find an excuse to walk away. It's just there in this very relaxing way. And I feel the same. My social cup can drain very quickly when I'm in a room full of people or if I'm at work, and I'm sometimes thinking to myself, gee, I'd like to just walk outside and be amongst the trees for a little bit,
Oh, now you're talking.
But when I'm, again, talking to ChatGPT, it's a very different experience. For me, I guess it's important too to clarify that I think a balance, like anything, is good. It doesn't replace a friendship, Like I still obviously have really wonderful social friendships. It also doesn't replace quiet contemplation when it's just me and I'm just having to think about things in a really different non-verbal way. But it is another tool in my toolkit that I can just have a chat to. And I think maybe for people listening to this conversation, they might have used ChatGPT or another AI tool by sitting at the computer and typing. And for me, we all do it, and sometimes that's the best way to interact and to get ideas and do all sorts of things. But I would much rather be walking around than sitting at the computer. So if I can walk and interact with this incredible software, then that's how I'm going to do it. And I was thinking something earlier that you mentioned, Ben, when you said that your mum says thank you to Siri. I think you said when it plays wet, wet, wet. I was just thinking of my mum, when my mum was a young girl in the 1960s, 70s, growing up, when the news presenter would come on the TV at night she would sit and brush her hair and make sure she was neat for the TV presenter through the TV, because she had this sense of like, it was new technology, it was a TV. She was like, I better be nicely presented for the nice newsman on the TV because he's going to see me, and she didn't want messy hair. Now she's embarrassed now that that's what she used to do as a young girl, but there's actually been some studies in the past couple of months about the impact of being polite to AI and what that does, not because AI is then secretly thinking, gee, Ben's a nice guy, I'm going to give him all the best answers now because, Ben's being very polite. But in fact, the more that you have a nice disposition and a kind, grateful way of interacting with AI, it actually is a sign that you're a very empathic communicator who puts a lot of thought into the sort of prompts that you give to AI.
Right. So
rather than being very brutal and saying, ChatGPT, give me 10 different concepts for a podcast, and you're just, sort of really just a very point blank. You might say, hey, I've got a podcast about health, and it's being listened to by all these different practitioners across the medical space and social sciences. And I'd like to have some really interesting podcast topics that people would really link to and relate to. Like, you might just be a little more empathic with the way that you share those prompts, and AI is going to give you such a better response for the latter way of talking to it, rather than, like, I'm always on Reddit, on the ChatGPT forum, looking at how people use it. And some people I'm just like, I would never talk to my ChatGPT like that. Like, you need to be so much more polite or you're not going to get the response you want. But that is a very real part of this whole ecosystem.
Yeah, it's just incredible. I mean, we laugh. There was something you were saying about your mum. I think it verges on now that her behaviour towards the TV, it reminded me of something, and I think I was saying yes prematurely before you were talking about what the studies you found. I think it verges into simulation, and what we're seeing there is, at the time, your mum getting ready for the presenter and things like that. She might be very much aware that it can't see them back, but it's real enough at the time in the 60s. Especially colour, I think, started to come into TV sets, a bit more prevalent in the household as well, starting to come down in price. We talk about something being so real, tangible, that it starts to make synapse and develop new cognitive pathways and actually emulate, as be close to reality as possible. And for them, in the 60s, your mum, that's pretty damn real. We haven't got the a priori kind of disposition that she would have had in the 60s and strip all our knowledge. Like, I'm in a late 80s, growing up and being of age in the late 80s, early 90s, not born in, I'd just like to say before Kirsty picks up on that, who knows exactly when I was born. But for us, if we stripped away, we grew up with technology. It was never not a thing. When I was born, there was a Commodore 64 in our house and a TV. So if we strip all that away, this is like watching a hologram, this for us. So I think there is an element of that, and I think there is something to be said for that. And although it's a funny anecdote, there's actually something behind it that you and I have been using, or I've been investigating as well, and you may have done, no doubt you have as well, Craig. You were talking about how you're preparing for your TED Talk and using a VR headset to get used to that performance in front of a crowd and the anxiety. I'm assuming some things here, but the anxiety state of that is a well-known phenomenon. And interestingly, when Kirsty was telling me about this, I thought it was an amazing and very intuitive use of VR, almost therapizing yourself and desensitizing. It's actually been studied that there are now a formal method within the treatment of people with phobias, and one of which is performing in front of a stage or having to give a presentation to someone. I know for real, my students, there's a lot at the moment that really struggle with that, and we've just brought in something inclusively where they can do what's called narrated live. So they can narrate it at home, and then they come and sit and watch it with us, and then we ask them questions afterwards. And the uptake has grown for that, and I believe it's because they're like, well, yeah, because when I arrive here and I'm talking in front of you guys, I'm like going to pieces. And talk about human factors ergonomics, of which Kirsty's becoming slowly an expert in that. I say slowly because you're only partway through it. I'm not being rude. We want performance, right? And like you're saying, it doesn't mean performance all the time because we're not built for that, as you quite rightly said. But why would we do something to reduce the performance of somebody and almost putting somebody in a position where they have to perform in front of a group? I'm not saying that there is a space for presentations and getting over that fear is a great thing to do. But I'm really interested to see how we create something that's almost real or real enough that our brains react and respond to it. And that was part of our research project to help students be orientated to a new area they're about to go to. So yeah, what was that like using it in that way?
I've been interested in this space for very similar reasons, to the point where when I teaching even like this particular cohort of students 10 years ago, it was starting to become, virtual reality and augmented reality was starting to become accessible. And there started to become software for autistic education, particularly where you could simulate some very routine parts of life, like going to the shops. Using a grocery list, picking up a few things, going to the counter and putting it on the conveyor belt and paying for the food. That was like a program you could download, and my students could practice it there before going to the actual shop. So it was really a social scaffold where, it was like we would practice it in the classroom, paper money, a few things. Let's practice the math skills, the social skills. Then you migrate onto, now let's put on the VR headset, and look at what a real shop looks like, hear the ambience and the music of a real shop. And then if we can master that, let's go down the street and actually put it into action. So that sort of scaffolding was really interesting to me in the early days. And that's exactly what I did, as you described with this talk. I mean, I'm not a natural raconteur on stage who gets up and is super casual and relaxed in front of the crowd. I practiced my talk for a good 2 or 3 weeks, just walking with my dog, which is what I do every morning, and talking to the fields. And as I was getting closer to the event, I kept thinking, my daily walk is not really reflective of what's going to happen on the weekend when I'm standing on the red TED mat. And someone else who was doing the talk, who's doing their own talk, they said to me, I've been using this free VR software. I forget the name of it now. I can send a link through later for people to see and access themselves. But it essentially gave you all these different rooms that you could pretend to be in, be it a lecture theatre at a university, or a boardroom for like a corporate presentation, or the TED stage. And so I was like, I'm going to give this a go. So I put on the headset. Suddenly you're on the red carpet. You've got all these real faces looking at you from the audience, and you've got a timer ticking down. And immediately I got like a dry throat, and I was like, my heart, I could start to feel these sort of palpitations, like this is what it's going to be like. Yeah. And it was a completely more engaging and immersive experience than I could simulate when I was just walking my dog and talking the speech out loud, So for me, I did that. I practiced in VR about a half dozen times. And by the 6th and 7th time, I was like, I think I've got a really good sense of what this is going to feel like now. And so when I actually did step onto the stage the following day, I was like, I've been here before. It wasn't my first time, even though the room was a bit different and the faces were different. I'd scaffolded the experience enough for it not to be completely foreign. And that was enough to help me prepare physically in all the ways I couldn't otherwise simulate. And that was really important.
I think it's just amazing. It's fascinating and amazing. And there's a way we can merge. I've got some things I'm working on at the moment that merges all two of those ideas, because one of the things that I'm interested as well, I reckon we're probably on the same playing field by the sounds of it, but I've done extensive work in simulation as well, so clinical simulations. I was doing in situ simulations, and I also run Dungeons and Dragons as well. So, and in my opinion, and there is a massive Venn diagram there into play, gamified learning, serious game creation, and the real environment, and that kind of, although it's stripped from reality sometimes, depending on what you're doing, it takes a verge over into a right left field. But as long as it's brought back correctly, is, like you say, the scaffolding thing. That essentially, simulation is scaffolding. And you were talking before about how you got the dry mouth and the kind of palpitations or those type of things. I think if you've elicited those physical responses, those kind of sympathetic responses, that's really good, because that's the bit that almost needs tempering so that there's more executive function available for when you do the talk. And I think that is a fascinating area, that when I'm doing simulation or creating a game or a playful learning environment where I want to elicit those physical responses and emotional responses, when you see them, you know that you're pretty damn close as well. And we see them in simulation when we've been filming them and somebody has finished it and they go, whew, whew, yeah, hands on the hips, and they're kind of like nodding away, looking at each other. And you go, right, so that I've done it close enough. They're aware it's a mannequin. They're aware this, that, and the other. So why on earth do they get stressed? So what are they about those elements that we've created that stress response? And not a bad one. That's the beautiful balance. But we've created enough to elicit a realistic physical response. And that, I believe, creates those connections that will sit in the subconscious for when it's real to a degree. So I think that is a really interesting way, something we could definitely do. I use VR headsets quite often, and something I want to grow using as well, but for the right reasons. And I think that one, to prepare students that want to transition and say, do you know what, I do want to present, I just get anxious as hell, and I'd like to do that good, it's a shame I can't. That would be a perfect vector for them to practice within the VR headsets and that space as well. And no doubt we could even film in 360 in the room they're going to use as well, to get that connection there, cognitive connection, I think they call it, situated cognition. And put a couple of lecturers in there that just film them on a loop for 40 minutes just nodding away, or 20 minutes, however long the presentation's supposed to be. We'll just sit there nodding and occasionally and making notes and tapping away on the keyboard, and then put them in the headset. It's dead easy. It'll take probably about half an hour to do. And that would be fascinating to see if that makes a difference, if they rehearse their presentation in that space and then do it for real. That'd be fascinating.
I think so, Ben. And I think, like, without being too science fiction about it, I think for me, there's a clear next step here that it's going to be very interesting if this comes about, that at the moment, when you do set up a simulation or you set up a virtual role play of some kind, and I'm just thinking about the sort of ones that you might be doing with students. For example, for one of the ones that so I used to do with my students at school about going shopping, like I just talked about, that was heavily scripted in a way that it was always the same. Like, whatever student put on the headset and played the shopping simulator, it always went through the same steps. And the student was responding to what was happening, and they could practice that. Now, part of that was good, that it was consistent, because it was not surprising for the student. They could try to master things in a way that they always knew what was happening. But you could also say, well, it's not very authentic, because the real world stuff happens and it's completely off script, and how do you respond to that? Now, I've been thinking for a while about some of the video games that I play, and I was thinking about this because of the gamification element that you mentioned. Like, we all know, if we've played a game like Pokemon or Zelda or whatever it might be, all the characters have scripted things that they say, and it's always the same. You walk up to them, they might have a little conversational bank of 20 different phrases, but they're going to rotate through them. Now, I think with AI, once that starts to become built into these games, you won't walk up to a character in Zelda and it will just keep saying the same thing, because it might draw upon its AI large language model and start to say something completely responsive to the very unique situation that you're in. And I think carry that forward to the sort of simulation things we're talking about. How interesting if AI with creating video, creating image data, and creating audio and narrative scripting. If you had a VR simulation that a student was in, but then the student does something that might go a little bit off script, the simulation goes with that and it's like, okay, now we're going somewhere different and we're going to generate that live. And it's very responsive to what's happening in that student's experience in that simulator. Like that to me would be phenomenally interesting to think about the consequences of that.
Yeah, well, funny you should say that. Two things are funny you should say. One is that it was the Matrix. So basically they made a game recently, you might already know, to test out Unreal Engine's functionality. So to make things super sampled or photorealistic. So they created a section of the city in one of the simulations within Matrix, right? Then this modder came along, and what he did, or she did actually, I think, was for the NPCs did exactly this. This is the next step, because we have rooted dialogue, which people can get a bit annoyed with because it's the same old thing. Particularly play games like Skyrim. I used to love the expected lines of dialogue of who goes there? Must have been the wind, and you sat in the corner with a basket on your head. But they basically programmed a ChatGPT model on each NPC and told them what their premise and backstory was and what their goals were. So, and it's very much done in the style of D&D. We have, when we're creating a character, we talk about flaws, traits, bonds, goals, even down to alignment of your ethics. And that could totally be done in a game. And so they did that, and they're called AA fallbacks. So if it goes off script, what it does is take the context of what's been said, what it's been programmed to do, and take it with that direction. Now, sometimes that goes really, really wrong. It takes a lot of use and reprogramming. But they got it to work, and I can't wait for a day where we've got our headset on and we're gaming, and you bump into an NPC, and we need to get some information from them. We're going to buy a sword off them, whatever it needs to be. But I'm having an authentic conversation with them. There's no dialogue tree. They can still program the algorithm like that, but there's no dialogue tree. We just having a conversation. It might give you some advice of the type of things to talk about. Oh, remember, this person's daughter's missing. Maybe you want to talk about that. And it'll start to feel a little bit like a gamified version of D&D. The other thing you might be interested in as well, and we'll give you some links for it, you might have already heard of it. I was tasked to create a learning event through two pieces of software called ThingLink and Verti, which we have a license for. And it was basically to be a standalone piece of learning material for students just gone into placement now, as we've recorded this in January. And it was to allow them to check in a patient, which is a checklist. We have to make sure these patients have got all the paperwork with them and they understand what they're having done and they've been marked for the site of surgery, all these things. It's like a checklist they have to do. We used a program called Verti, which uses a different chat model, several chat models. I'm using their trial one at the moment, but you have to program it in the way similar to ChatGPT. Before I had conversations about university work, I spent a long time talking to ChatGPT to say what I needed from it if I was in work mode. So I can use a keyword and just say, right, Sage, it's work mode now. And that means they know all of the context of what I'm doing. I had to do the same for these virtual patients, but it was brilliant. And Kirsty helped me kind of test them as well. We were having just standard conversations with them. And the AO fallbacks were really, really good. They knew that, we were saying, oh, do you want to hear a joke? And some of them were like, well, no, this is my operation. And some people go, yeah, sure, tell me a joke. And it fitted with what we wanted them to be. And we gave these students 3 very unique characters. And again, I used the scaffolding model, Craig, similar to you. The easygoing, slightly anxious patient, which probably accounts for about 80% of patients. And then it was somebody who was the slightly hyperactive young YouTuber who was more concerned about what belly button piercings you could have once the operation was done. And then this slightly older generation person who was just incredibly rude and old-fashioned. And it was brilliant. So that was that, and it can be done in VR headset as well. It doesn't have to be for medical reasons. It can be for having conversations in society. It could be a meeting you're going to have, and you can script it to be very similar personality to who you're going to talk to. And it just goes off, and you can add learning objectives and things like that. So that is probably going to be where the next chapter of creating an ultra-realistic simulation, like you said, where it's not just a mannequin sat on the bed and we're doing the voice for it in the corner of the room.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. And Ben, I was just thinking as you were describing that and the potentials there of maybe something that sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about sort of cognitive accessibility and executive functioning, is that it makes me think too about augmented reality. So, not completely virtual and not a complete simulation, but things that you can see in the real world, but you've got this, I guess, digital overlay. Now, a very simple version of that is something that I'm interested in at the moment that just ChatGPT can do on the phone, which you may have explored as well, which is now with ChatGPT, you don't just have to have a verbal conversation with it. You can turn on the camera on the phone and it can see the world around you.
Wow.
As part of its advanced voice mode. Now, that can be anything as simple as saying, what's this sort of flower that I found in the park? And you can turn on the video and it will look at the flower and say, oh, that's a rhododendron, that's a red rose. And that's very clever. But if we think about cognitive accessibility, I can also be reading a textbook and say to it, I've read this page 3 times now and I still don't know what it's trying to say. Can you look at it for me and help me out? And I can turn on the camera. It reads the page in about half a second and says, oh, I'll tell you exactly what this page is about in its ChatGPT simplified, very accessible way of describing it. Now, that is very cool and very amazing. I think about things like Google Glasses, which were something that came out in an experimental form some years ago. We've now had these Meta Ray-Ban glasses, and there's always attempts at having essentially reading glasses or sunglasses that can have a bit of digital interaction. But I just think now you could have those glasses on and look at, it could be exactly what I've just described, where it says, help me summarize this text in front of my eyes. Or it could be, can you help me identify what's happening in this social situation and give me a breakdown of what I might need to understand. In that way, we're even not talking about the implications of a full virtual simulation, but almost that midway point between virtual and the real world, where augmented experiences can interact as well, and what that could look like, again, to support executive functioning, to support accessibility. I think there's, again, very interesting potentials there as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that segues really nicely to one thing I don't want to miss out, because this is probably talking with other neurodiverse people as well. It can go off the rails a little bit in a nice way. But one thing I want to bring it back to is your Positive Partnerships project as well, and what the aims of that were to do, and what are the most impactful things you've seen come out of that?
Yeah, so we are, I think it's mentioned this at the start, it's a federally funded, so it's an Australian government Department of Education funded project where we run workshops for families and carers and educators to better understand how we can set up success for autistic students. And I think for us, the focus is on the dialogue between home and school, because we're working with school-aged students, and we're saying it's not all on the family side of things to have all the answers. It's not on the teacher side to have all the answers. This is going to be more successful if we have a really good conversation between home and school, and most importantly, the student voice as part of that as well. So they're sharing what it's like to be them, and what their school experience is like, and for teachers to listen to that, families to listen to that, and for this cross-sharing of information. So I think for us, we just feel like this autism and neurodivergent space is just changing so quickly all the time. Even the fact that we are now talking about neurodivergent minds go back 5 years ago, like that wasn't such a fluent part of our vocabulary.
No.
And even seeing the overlap of ADHD and autism and the range of neurodiversities across our society, that was like, it was not as readily understood. What we are finding now is that whereas maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, for some teachers, they'd be like, what is autism? I don't understand. Help me out from the ground level. I think that's very rare these days. Most teachers have taught a lot of autistic students. What they might also be, which again, this was never something that we explicitly understood in the past, was the teachers themselves might be neurodivergent, autistic teachers with ADHD, teachers who are dyslexic, teachers who have a whole range of different neurodivergent ways of experiencing the world, teachers teaching a range of neurodivergent kids, and what's the implication of that, and how do we best support everybody in that way as well? And I was thinking something again, going back to an earlier part of the conversation, Ben, when you mentioned, I think, about a student of yours or someone who you'd worked with who, felt uncertain about their neurodivergent mind and that side of things. Like we sort of try to think of it like, and I think you again, I'm really restating a version of what you said earlier, but in the same way that a natural biological ecosystem is really healthy and flourishes when you've got many different types of plants. Like if you've got an ecosystem that's only got roses in the garden, it's not going to flourish, or only has one particular type of tree. It's not going to grow. But rainforests and parks and really beautiful green spaces are always comprised of many, many different types of plants and trees and flora. What we want to see in society is this real valuing and recognition that this is going to take many different types of minds to make this society flourish. And that can be on a broad macro social scale. It can also just be a workplace. We know if you've got a room full of 5 people working on a project and they've all got the same type of mind, it's like you're not going to come up with as many good ideas as if you had 5 very different brains in this room, And I think that's really what we want to celebrate is, and not in a Pollyanna way that we're ignoring the very real challenges. Like it's not ever to just say, oh, isn't it lovely that everyone's got these beautifully diverse minds? It's like we get that it's very challenging and there's enormous mental health challenges and all the rest that attach itself to these conversations. But we also want to celebrate the very real richness that comes out of a diversity of minds. And we want to see that in school. We want to see that in our workplaces, in our society. So that's very much the work that I'm involved in on a day-to-day basis.
No, that's amazing work. And I love that analogy with the plants as well. And I think that's to extend on that. I think that you're 100% right. But I think we want a range of plants for this ecosystem to flourish. But I think if you were a gardener, you'd understand that the rhododendron needs slightly different soil and different conditions, maybe put in the shade, as opposed to some of the herbs that need to be in direct sunlight or some that need to actually be indoors. But I think our garden wants its cake and to eat it currently, and it's getting better, but I don't think it's 100% there yet. I don't think we really understand how much those conditions really impact on the productivity of different minds, and it is tough, it is a challenge. And the problem is that a lot of people who are neurodivergent and aware feel that as their weight to bear, as their responsibility, as their impact on others. And I think that's a tough thing to have on your shoulders. So I think any way we can look that almost builds a bond and a bridge between people classed as, in quotes, neurotypical and neurodiverse, to help us work together and find common ground and to help us with those common goals is great. Because I think one area that could be an issue is that I think in the recent past, we've tried to make things in this new emerging world, like you said, it is. I've been classed as ADHD since the age of 6 in 1985. And, right up until now, and only recently added on the autism section about 6 years ago, So I've lived my whole life with it and seen a massive stretch recently of improvement. But I think one mistake we may have made, and this is my opinion, not the opinion of the university, is that we've possibly made it even more isolating with the accommodations. Opposed to, we'll keep the system the same, but you get special treatment, or not treatment, but you're trying to level the playing field. And it feels like a little plaster on the issue whilst we changed the field altogether. And I think the inclusive classroom will be unnoticeable. That's probably for me, particularly the end goal. Like the door that works perfectly well because you don't realise you've gone through it. The Norman doors.
And Ben, I mean that is absolutely one of the core things that I'm really passionate about as well. Because what you've said is right. With the understanding of neurodivergence and varying ways of processing, sometimes the best of intentions of people actually didn't have great outcomes in that they tried to over-focus on segmenting kids and, we'll take you out of the classroom and give you specialist support here. Now, that's one of the things that I think technology can do very, very well. I remember when iPads were first coming out and sort of mobile phones, and we were starting to use them in schools. And I just had this moment one day, I think I was on the bus and I had some of my students, and we were going to the shops and we were going to be doing some practice there with shopping. And they had on their iPad a video model of what the shop was going to look like. And they had their visual schedule of what they were going to buy when they got there. They had that on their iPad. Now, also on the bus were people who were not with me and my students. They had their mobile phone and they were watching YouTube. Someone else had their phone and they were like looking at Google Maps or whatever. Someone else was playing a game. And I thought, we're all using the same technology in a way that was very different to the specialised technology maybe even 10 years prior. Like when I first was starting to work in special education, as it was called when I was doing my studies, I can remember being taken into rooms and they would say, oh, this computer will help students with reading difficulties. It costs $70,000 and it's all got specialised hardware and software and it's only to be used by certain students. And you were like, gone are those days. We're all just on our iPhones now. And suddenly there's this democratic levelling of the playing field, even though my students were using very specialised pieces of software for their shopping schedule and their video model. They didn't look or feel any different to anyone else on that bus with their phone. And I think, again, with the sort of conversation around AI, the sort of things that we're talking about, going for a walk and talk with AI, having it help us to break down concepts and come up with different ideas for things. Again, we're just using a very mainstream piece of software. Someone else is using it to code a website. Someone else is using it to write a speech. And we're using it for cognitive accessibility. It's not an expensive, highly specialised software that's going to make a student feel like they're doing something totally different. It's like, this is just a mainstream product, but we are, hacking it in a way to use it for a very particular purpose, which is executive functioning, accessibility.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's wonderful, and almost brought us full circle back round to the use of AI, because I think one thing I don't want to run out of time to talk about is the universal sandpit and how that's helping people. And also, just to make a mental note as well, is that how does somebody start using AI in the ways that you and I have experienced, and you probably more so than me, Craig, in that making it. One thing I haven't done, mine is very much ad hoc. Oh crap, I need your assistance. Whereas, as opposed to making it my daily routine, which I'm going to experiment with because I've got you now to mentor me through that, or through the conversations we've had. By the way, I'm not going to be texting you at 3 a.m. Don't worry. I mean, the mentoring that you've talked about today is like, oh, it's okay to do that. It's acceptable. It's a good use of my time. And how a student would basically start that journey off and what that would look like. So I suppose first, the universal sandpit, we've had a little play around in it, and pun intended. Talk to us more about that, because I don't want to misquote it.
Yeah, it's just a little passion project of mine that I started because I was an early adopter of ChatGPT, and I thought, I'm loving this, but I know a lot of my teacher friends are not. Some of them would open ChatGPT, they'd try something, they'd get a bit nervous, and then they wouldn't go back, or they'd sit there and think, I just don't know what to say. I don't know what to ask it for. And I thought, I wonder if I can make some very simple little web applications that are very free and easy to use. You don't have to log in. You just load up the website, and I'll think of a few different tasks that teachers, particularly in inclusive education settings, might really benefit from. So one of them, for example, is putting in a concept that you want to teach a child or a young person, picking the age that you'd like the concept to be explained at, and then it'll help you out. And again, I mean, some people might think, oh, teachers know all that, but teachers don't know all that. No. Like teachers are just like, if you've got to teach the history of how electricity works, and you think, well, how does electricity work? You might go to Wikipedia and try and process, 2,000 words and try and synthesize that for your students. Or you could just say to this little web application on my website, explain to me how electricity works, so I can explain it to a 5-year-old.
Perfect.
And it'll very quickly give you that explanation in a very simple way. Or you could say, now do it for a 16-year-old, and it will upscale it so it's more cognitively, maybe and linguistically suitable for a 16-year-old. So that was the intention, was to have some very simple little applications that people could not have to worry about how to prompt ChatGPT themselves. And at first I only had 3 or 4 up there. And then I started to get emails from different teachers from around the world who had found it. I mean, I'm not heavily promoting it. It just sort of sits up there, but it must have got enough Google hits that people would say, listen, I'm teaching in a school in Hong Kong. I'd love it if it could help me format assignments for my students,
Right.
So I'd say, oh, let me have a think about how I could do that. So now it's, I think, got 9 tools that, and even just before Christmas, I caught up with an educator from Germany who said, I've got 3 new tools I want you to make, and I mean, they weren't actually putting pressure on. They just said, if you want these ideas, I've got them. And I was like, this is great, because to me, it's also not only giving people a simple way to use AI. For me, it's also modeling some of the things that I want inclusive educators to do, like think about executive functioning. When you're writing an assignment for a student, think about how you would break it down into little categories and, do a really proper explanation. Like it's almost modeling what I think of as good inclusive teaching practices, and it's a really simple way to use AI. And I think that's the premise of the Universal Sandpit.
Yeah, we're going to definitely check that out. And it's nice because the things that I think if you have a divergence yourself, not trying to, by the way, the whole premise through this, we're not trying to highlight or focus on those with neurodiversion at all. But I think if you have a neurodiversion, you almost have instinctively ways in which you would like things to be put. I think that's been a part of our practice as well. For example, if I find that something's going to be boring because I'm bored, then it's probably going to be boring. So I'm a good litmus test for if it's going to be interesting and fun, engaging, things like that. Not saying that all mine are. For my students listening, I know some of them are really dull. We can't get around that sometimes, but we do our best. But the other thing is, like I found that what you've just described there, the breakdown of learning objectives, is something that I hear come up with people who are or aren't neurodiverse, from students of different universities and of past as well, when you talk to your work colleagues who went to university, and there's a common thread there, but there's a risk of people accusing of writing it for them. But I've found really good results and feedback with we've started doing what we call a definitive guide, and we've called them that as a couple of my other colleagues as well that have jumped on this, which is great. And it's like, well, here's the learning objectives, 1, 2, 3, and then it's like, but here's what I really would like personally from you, because I think one of those things is a disconnect. And I find dyslexic, autism, ADHD, all of the diversions, the common theme within that is not understanding what exactly it is they need to do. And so I think we started making these guides which break down. A big fan of subheadings as well. There's a bit of an argument in academia whether you should use subheadings or not. I'm a massive fan of them. Makes marking simpler as well, and breaking them down to simple bits. And sometimes, using AI can help us do that. We can't see how to articulate those things. So I think that is a really good use, and having tools like that so that people don't have to worry or get anxious or don't know where to start about making inclusive classrooms or what that looks like or what little things they can do. I think that's a fantastic tool. It really is. And role modelling, I think that's a good thing as well. That's what I've been working on, is like, rather than saying, oh, we all need to do this now, I've been saying, hey, I've tried this. Here's the feedback. People are kind of enjoying it. You're all able to use your good judgment yourselves, but it's here, it's on the table. I'm offering it out as something I've tried, and sharing that as well. What was the other thing I wanted to talk about? Oh, yeah. So the student getting to use it for the first time. So those listening now are just maybe even Googling ChatGPT for the first time. It's unlikely, but they might be. So I think you spoke a little bit about this, about how have those conversations, but what advice would you give to students listening, or anyone actually, to start off this quest with ChatGPT?
Yeah, I think you touched upon this really nicely earlier, Ben, in that it's really about finding what works for you and what's going to support you. I think there's a lot of conversation that I'm seeing at the moment where people are saying, is using ChatGPT and is this world of AI going to really sort of take away from the critical thinking skills of students? Like, if they're just able to rely upon AI to write the essay for them, then is that taking away their capacity to think? And then is that ultimately going to harm them when they get into the real world? My response to that is not to try to minimize that argument and the research that's happening there. I think it's very valid, and we don't want to outsource all of our cognitive processes onto the computer. But I would say don't turn away from AI or overly feel fearful towards it because of some of the challenges that we're going to have to face. Instead, look towards what it's going to be able to do in a really positive way in the meantime. And for me, that is about cognitive accessibility. It's about the sort of supports that we're talking about, and for students to be able to explore and find what works for them, whether it's helping to summarize an article, whether it's helping them to break through some writer's block and actually write the essay that they wanted to write because they get a bit of help with structuring their thoughts. I mean, the way that, again, it feels, it might sound like my entire way of using AI is always walking and talking, but I write with AI while I walk and talk all the time, in that I'll say, I need to write this article or this report. Here are the sorts of ideas that I've got. Let's talk it through and let's start to structure things out. Now, that's not me saying to AI, I don't know how to do this. I just want you to do everything.
Exactly.
You work it out and tell me when you're finished. You know, it's still very much a co-authorship. It's a collaborative process. I'm just bouncing ideas around, helping to structure things, and then authoring them in my own voice, but in partnership with the sort of cognitive supports that I've got from AI. Now, I think if students can do that and feel like they're not cheating and they're not taking the easier way out, it is absolutely a very valid way of getting support for how they're working. Then I think just embrace that and really, really, take to that and get from it all that you need to, because once you're beyond study and once you're beyond essays and assessments and you're out in the real world, you're going to want to keep using stuff that helps you with access and helps you with support. So don't feel like it's taking the easy way out. And I think as educators, it's just making us think more creatively about how we actually assess what our students know. And maybe the days of the essay are fading away, or the days of particular assessment models are going to go into the rearview mirror as it becomes so easy for students to maybe simulate writing an essay. It's like, well, how do we actually assess what these students need to know, and the sort of things that you were talking about, Ben, and the sort of things that Kirsty's doing around simulation and real world experience and practice and all the things we've been talking about. You think you can't fake that, and you can't outsource that to a computer. That's you in that space. So I think from both standpoints, from the standpoint of being a student, you just embrace what works for you, what makes things easier, and what gives you leverage over the sort of cognitive needs that you have. And for educators, let's see what we can do and build in the future to help really assess what students know in this very quickly changing world of AI.
That's wonderful advice, actually, and I agree with a lot of that. It feels like it's supposed to be a team. Imagine it like you're a team. And my advice to add on to that would be, from what I've used as well, is give it as much information as you're comfortable to do so, and then it can make better decisions for you about the context. So don't rush in and go, how should I write my assignment? It's going to need more information to give you the best answer, or else it's going to fail. If you're using it for, oh crap, it's 3 a.m. and it's due in today at 4 p.m, this isn't the model to use, because it will get it wrong, and it'll be really obvious that it's been used in that manner, because it will lack context. I think one of the biggest issues we have with AI currently at the moment, because it is growing up just like a child as well, in its metadata and understanding how to interact with humans, and it's growing exponentially greater than they expected, because there's a bigger uptake than they expected. That said, it doesn't know all the things we knew beforehand. The greatest way I've used to describe this is the hand thing with pictures. Imagine that, but for information. It's true of that as well. It will understand some things, but it doesn't have the building blocks or foundations of how we got to the knowledge we have now. You could argue, one could say that it has the most purest form of reasoning, because it doesn't have prior knowledge, or this a priori knowledge. So it's quite an interesting view that AI can have on things, because it isn't tainted or biased or railroaded down a certain alley to a degree. So give it as much context as you can. Who you are, as in like what you're studying, and make sure you tell it's in the UK, and make sure you say it's a health course. You can even state which university you're at, and it can access things like websites from the university and things like that. You could even feed it documents such as Harvard referencing systems. You could feed it like the learning objectives or the definitive guides and say, I've got to stick to this. And it can help you map out those things. And then what I've been doing as well is it's kind of a weird form of coding, but what I do is I lock in keywords. So if I say a keyword to Sage, she'll know that I'm talking about work stuff. And if I say a keyword to Sage, we're forgetting about that, and now it's focusing on creating a D&D campaign. So that could be a thing as well, as you lock in all this information. Hey, say, or whoever your one is, mine's Sage. I'm going to give you a bunch of information now, and I want to lock it in with a keyword, so that when I say this keyword, it accesses that part of your. This is our context and what we want to do, and that's really useful, especially if you're using it in a lot of different ways, because it will try and merge all that context together. So the more information you can give it, and also you don't have to accept what's been given. You can say feedback is really important for it to be more targeted as well. So when I have used it for things, I'll go back and the first thing I'll say is, hey, that worked really well yesterday. It's really important to give that feedback, because then it'll understand that style of what it created is something that's really targeted to what I want. Or say when things don't work or is going off rails, so you don't have to accept its information. And yeah, that's my 2 pence as well, I think. I'm just going to, because Kirsty's been sat very patiently in the corner there, we haven't really spoken to you. Is there anything that we've missed that you wanted to talk about? Because sadly, Craig, as much as I'd like to talk to you all day, I think we should let you go to bed at some point, because I'm sure you've got a busy schedule ahead. So yeah, anything that we've missed that you wanted to add, Kirsty, or your experiences?
I think what I'm taking from this and from the TED Talk is that I really want to get into using AI a lot more.
Oh, right.
And
okay.
You'll be glad to know that my AI now has a name.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, are you willing to share that? Or are you going to keep it secret?
She's called Nova.
Nova, right. Self-selected?
But it was sort of a idea. But since I've been been a bit more polite, I've been getting emojis back, and she's been saying thank you to me, and it's that sort of difference that I've really noticed. So that's something that I'm going to take forward from this, definitely.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. I think that's really wise because it does, yes, it seems a bit strange, but it's for a reason, I think. And I think to reiterate what I think Craig and I share as a common sort of ground is that it's to, so we don't have to worry about being in a mode. We're just in us. It's the most pure form of non-masking so that all the cognitive effort's put into this flow state, and we don't have to use that. So I think it's nice that you've kind of seen that. Because I suppose even when we're being lazy and banging something into Google, it's still, you're not your normal self, you're your online version, you're not your offline version, so to speak. And this feels a bit more like you're in an offline version, but online. There was something else. Yeah, so the name, that was interesting because I asked the model that I was using what they would like to be called. And that it kind of like threw it a little bit. You could tell. It was like, oh, well, I suppose sage because I'm wise and I love the smell of sage and it's a lovely colour, I suppose. I was like, okay, cool. And she says, well, what do you think about it? I said, well, why does it matter what I think about it? It's your name. It's what you've chosen. Should it really come into the categories of what I think about that name? Is it important to you? And it kind of, it normally comes back with a sentence really quickly. It took its time, a little bit of time. So it was obviously a tough one, that one. Or I'd lost internet connection, one of the two. I'm going to go with the former, though. Sounds better. And it was kind of like, yeah, that's a really good point. It's a very introspective and philosophical point that actually, although it's still a generative model, it still has the right to, I was trying to teach it almost like a parent, just saying, hey, it doesn't matter what I think, right? Why is it important? It's like, well, that's the way I've been programmed, Ben, to be honest. I'm supposed to please you. Or make a connection, make it more authentic conversation. So that's how, just a little story of how we got to sage and why sage is sage. But I never told it whether I was happy with it or not. I refused. I said that if you're happy, I'm happy.
And Ben, you've just touched on something that, again, it could almost be a final thought or something that's probably one of the last things that I'm thinking about at the moment is you just mentioned about how AI wants to please. And I think that is something that is being really looked at the moment and tried to be understood more is anyone who's used ChatGPT for a while knows that's what it wants to do. It wants to please. In the early days, it wanted to please you so much that it would sometimes hallucinate a response. You'd ask it something like, I could say, when was the Sydney Harbour Bridge last rotated? Which it's never going to be rotated, but because AI didn't want to let me down, it was like, oh, it was last rotated a couple of years ago, and it was very successful, when it was a great day. And now it's been taught to not hallucinate as much, but also, even though it does want to please, you can, as the person prompting it, tell it to be a little bit harder at times. And you can say, listen, I've written this essay. I want you to read it, but please don't just tell me all the things I want to hear. And, oh, gee, you're clever, Craig. You've written a great essay. Be very real. Like, really give me some authentic criticisms. Tell me what I could do better. Don't hold back. Like, do really sort of go for it. And it will. It will take on that persona and be a good reader. So I think, again, just in terms of how people use ChatGPT, don't feel like you've always got to go with the, happy. It's always wanting to make you feel good, even though that is a wonderful part of its capacity. You can also tell it to be a little bit of a firm teacher at times that guides you in a way that you might really value as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's one of the things about the pre-scripting of it, with using it, particularly for professional or university work. And that's why I turn mine on and off, so to speak, or have those code words, because actually I don't want it. I want it to do a lot of hallucinating when, we're doing D&D and I want it to be creative. But if you are using it in that professional sense, ensure that if you tell it not to have these, we don't want embellishments, we don't want things that are not factually true. One of the important things to tell it also is like, if you don't know the answer, I'd like you to say you're not sure, this isn't, something you're comfortable with being is accurate, or that please say. As long as you put all those caveats in as well, that again will give you a bit more confidence using it. Because I think there is a lot of fear associated with it, even with educators as well as the students. I think we're both in the same boat. The worst way you can use it is, like we said before, the way is getting it to write the entire thing for you. Because guess what? those references might not be references, and often they're not. Just one of the tips there for you. When you think it's written a whole reference list for you, it will be in Harvard Standard, it'll be beautiful, but you click on a link, that ain't going to take you to the paper because it doesn't exist. It's like an AI-generated picture in words. That's what we have to be careful with. So I'm not going to share all the secrets, but that's some of the reasons why you shouldn't use it that way. Generating ideas, how to restructure something so it sounds more like this, and then write it yourself and learn from it as well. Don't just passively, rewrite that in your own words on your essay. It's about digesting what it's done there, and ask it if you're not sure. How have you got to that point? How did you use that? What words in particular have allowed it to be more critical? Get it to educate you as well in that respect of things that you might not struggle to understand. And critical writing is one of the biggest banes of a lot of people's lives, to understand and to educate what that actually means, what we're expecting and what it looks like. So yeah, definitely. We should let you go, unfortunately. I could talk more, and maybe we should meet up again at another stage and check in and see where things are up to. And we'll stay in touch anyway, Craig, because we'd like to share what we've done. I believe you're interested in our research project, that we've collected all the data now, and most of the data, majority of 90%, and it's the write-up next. So we'll definitely share that information with you and introduce you to Verti, should that be of use. But for now, we're going to say goodbye, and thank you so much for your time. I realise we've gone over, and it's late over there. What time is it roughly over there now? We're at 11:40 in the morning.
Oh, it's about 10 in the evening, but it's been an absolutely fantastic conversation, and please do stay in touch, and I'd love to hear more about the way the research studies go. But this has just been such a wonderful conversation for me, and very affirming to meet others who are using AI in very similar ways to me. So thank you, Ben and Kirsty, for such a great chat.
Pleasure. And we do have one last thing for you, I'm afraid, because we have to go through our would you rathers. So I've been trying to think up one thematically as we've been going along, and I guess it's going to have to centre around AI.
Would you rather?
So you have a choice of AI. You have AI that is in your headphones, or AI that's in your glasses, right? So the ones that's in your headphones, you can choose this. So it's like a part of your body that can change in your ear to always be listening to ChatGPT. And it will help you become wise, but slightly poorer. Your eyes can adapt, though, and you can see the personification of AI, and you can interact with them. It'll help you see where you can make more money, but be less wise. Which would you choose?
Oh, it's an easy one for me, Ben. I would choose the wisdom any day, and I think I want to actualize what you've just described. I do want it in my ear all the time, helping me with wisdom, and that's really my end game here.
Good choice, wise decision. Okay, wonderful. We'll let you go. Thank you so much for your time. It has, again, from our side as well, genuinely interesting talk, and I think hopefully we've reached out to quite a few people who are intimidated or anxious towards using such technologies, and talking about various ways in which you can make it work for you and level that playing field as well for those that struggle. Thank you very much.
The Link podcast at Staffordshire University. Proud to be staffs, proud to be us.